ever um dived into these political books that are all over the place? They're called like the politics book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. Well, I've been diving into a lot of these books lately. Ouch. So they have one for women and the things that happen within their bodies, right? It's called the Women's Atlas book, the Women's Atlas book. And then this other one is called the political book, Big Simple Ideas Explained. It's a pretty cool book, okay? So what I'm learning is a lot of different things about how the system has worked from ages before, right? So let's get into 700 BCE to 309 BCE. And the spring and the autumn periods begins in China. The hundred school of thoughts emerge. Okay, so this comes from this book, and it talks about how it kind of transports us into today's world and how we're currently living. So then we go into 600 to 500 BCE to that's where we're at. From 600 to 500 BCE, Confucius processed government based on traditional values administered by a class of scholars. So that's where it moves into a different phase, right? And then we go into 500 BCE to 510 AEC, and the Roman Republic is founded. 460 BCE to 460 AEC, we have the Greek sophisticates, including Protago I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, so please excuse me. Protagoras maintains that political justice is an imposition of human values and not a reflection of justice in nature. So it seems like every time that we move from one government to another and one decade to another, uh, we keep evolving as people in what we think is right and wrong, right? So then we go into 600 BC and 600 AEC, right? And the Chinese general Sun Tzu writes The Art of War for King Hilu of Wu. So that's where that happens. And then in 594 BCE to 594 AEC, Solon, Solon creates a constitutional for Athens that paves the way for the democratic city state. So that's something that also occurs during that time. Hello, everyone. 476 to 221 BCE, during the Warring States periods, the seven largest Chinese states vie from supremacy. So that's another thing that happens. 399 BCE to 399 AEC is after years of questioning politics and society in Athens, Socrates is sentenced to death. So again, as the years go by and decades go about, we continue to change and evolve, right? So everything complete it's changing. And we're seeing it right now in our own country how our thoughts and our position in certain things continue to change day in and day out. So again, this comes a lot of this theory comes from the book that's called The Politics Book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. I'm going to read something to you in a little bit about it because that really kind of got me. See? So from 470 to 391 BCE, Mozi proposes a purely metrochic, metrochic, trochic, I think that I'm saying that correctly, class of ministers and advisors chosen for their virtue and ability. Virtue and ability. What are people talking about today? Virtue, right? Virtue. I mean, I don't know who's virtuous nowadays because it seems like everyone has tail to be stepped on. In 470 AEC and 54 AEC, his politics, Aristotle describes various forms of rule of the city state and suggests policy constitutional government as most practical. So I guess what I'm saying is that in order for us to understand the future and what's happening in our current society, we kind of need to understand what is happening or what happened in the past, right? So in 372 to 289 BC, Mengzi popularized a Confucian idea in China is when it started to evolve, right? 200 BC and 200 AEC, the Han Dynasty adopts Confucianism as the official philosophy of China. So we continue to see changes continue to evolve here. I want to say hello to everyone who is stopping by and listening. I do these lives here and there. We talk about topics that, are relevant and we need to learn. So if you want to stay and learn, that's awesome. I greatly appreciate it and thank you. So in 380 to 360 BCE, in the Republic, Plato advocates rule by philosopher's king who possesses the wisdom and knowledge to understand the nature of a good life. In 370 to 283 BCE, Shanakai's advice of Shanrupa Mayura helped establish the Mayuran Empire in India. Now, if I slaughtered that, I am so sorry, but you know, different languages, different dialect. I am only speak English and Spanish, sorry. So 300 BCE to 300 AEC, in the attempt to unify China, the authoritarian ideas of Shang Zhang and Han Fengzu are adopted as a doctrine of legalism. Okay, that so we see how things continue to change, right? So in 54 to 51 BCE, Cicero writes De Republica modeled on Plato's Republic, but advocating a more democratic form of government. Now, somewhere along in this book, I read that Plato was kind of off. Okay, so there's that. So it also talks about political thoughts in China. So this is what it says. Political theory can trace to its beginnings of the civilization of ancient China and Greece. In both places, thinkers emerged who questioned and analyzed the world around them in ways we now call philosophy. From around 600 BCE, some of them turned their attention to the way we recognize societies. Both in China and Greece, both these questions were considered part of moral philosophy or ethics. Philosophers examined how society should be structured to ensure not just the happiness and the security of the people, but to enable people to live a good life. I think that's a good model. Now, I don't know much, so don't take my word for it. Go look it up. Around 700 BCE, China entered to a time of prosperity known as the Spring and Autumn period. Scholarships was highly valued, resulting in hundreds of schools of thought. By the far most influential was Confucian Kongzin, who combined moral and political philosophy in his proposals for upholding traditional Chinese moral values in a state led by virtuous rulers. The idea was further defined by Mosey and Meneses to prevent corruption and despotic rule. As the conflict between states increased in the 5th century BCE, the Spring and Autumn period came to a close, placed by the Warring States period and the struggle for control and unified Chinese empire. It was the most atmospheric that thinkers such as Han Fei Su and the legalist school advocacy disciplined as a guide of principle of state. And Sun Tzu applied the military tactics of warfare to ideas of foreign policy and domestic government. These more authoritarian politic philosophies brought stability to a new empire, which later converted to a form of Confucianism. So we see how things change, and now we get into like the Greek democracy, right? Because things continue to change. At much of the same time as the developments of China and Greek civilization was flourishing, like China and Greece was not the single nation, but a collection of separate cities and states, nations. But in the collective as separate cities and states under various systems of government, most were ruled by monarchs or aristocracy. But Athens had established a form of democracy under a constitution introduced by a statesman Solon in 594 BC. The city became the cultural center of Greece, providing an intellectual space in which philosophers could speculate on the constituted the idea of state, its purpose, and how it should be governed. Here, Plato advocated rule by the elite of philosopher kings, while his pupil Aristotle compared the various possible forms of government. Their theories would form the basic of Western political philosophy. After Aristotle and the Golden Age, a classical Greek philosopher drew to a close. As Alexander the Great embarked on campaigns to extend his empire from Macedon into the northern African and across the Asias, far as the Himalayas, but in India he met with resistance from an organized opposition. The emergence of Chanakala, I'm sorry again, helped to transform India into an ununified empire under Chandragupta Mayar. I am so slaughtering these names. I so apologize. Believed in a pragmatic approach to political thinking, advocating strict discipline with the aim of securing economic and material securities for the state rather than for moral welfare of the people. His realism helped to protect the Mayuran Empire from attack and brought most of the Indian into the unified state that lasted more than 100 years. And then we go into the rise of Rome, which is where a lot of people kind of start learning more about history, right? And how our political systems have been placed together. I want to thank you and welcome you in, and thank you for staying in here and being here. So, thank you. Meanwhile, other powers were rising in Europe. The Roman Republic had been founded in about 510 BCE with the overflow of a tyrannical monarchy, a form of representative democracy similar to the Athenian model was established. A constitution evolved with governmental led by two councils elected annually and the Senate of Representatives to advise them. Under the system, the republic grew strength, occupying provinces in most of the mainland and Europe. However, in the first century BC, civil conflict spread in the republic as various factions vied for power. Julius Caesar, I know all of you know that name. Julius Caesar seized control in 48 BCE and effectively became the emperor, bringing the republic to an end. Rome had once again come under a monarch dynasty rule, and a new Roman Empire was dominated most of Europe for the next 500 years. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. We're going through some, kind of details. Hi, thank you for being here, Alexis. This is we're talking about a couple of things from a book that talk about different philosophies throughout history, right? And the reason that I decided to do this is because some of us don't understand why is it that everything's changing? Why is it that our thoughts have become so populist, right? And so conflictive? So we to understand that, we need to understand what happened in the past. So let's go through a couple of terms and how they're described, right? So the Hundred School of Thoughts, a period of great intellectual activity in ancient China from 400 to 221 BCE that pronounced Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and others. Confucianism is a political ethical philosophy emphasized virtual traditional values and governs of by a scholar class. Legalism, an authoritarian Chinese philosophy that advocated strict laws and discipline as a base of state power. So that's another one. Philosopher's King, Plato's concept that only rulers with philosophical knowledge and wisdom should govern. City state polis, an independent self governing city that's surrounded by territory, the basic political unit of ancient Greece. Mediocrity. Mediocrity. A system in which power and advancements are based on talent, virtue, and achievement rather than birth. Constitutional government. Does it sound familiar? A system of government whose powers are defined and limited by a constitution. The Roman Republic, a form of government of Rome from 509 to 27 BC, characterized by elected officials and a senate. Sophisticates, ancient Greek thinkers who argued that political justice is a human intervention and not a natural truth. And then, of course, the last one here is Chanaka of Rathasan, an ancient Indian strategist and philosopher who wrote a treatise on statecraft, economic policy, and military strategy. These are things that we need to talk about, and we will continue to go through them because as I read the first pages of this book that I was talking about, it talks about how some of these people believe that some of us should not be voting. And it's kind of ironic because we find ourselves in this spot today, right? Where we are listening to our public elected officials telling us that we shouldn't be voting. So here it says if everyone could have everything they wanted whenever they wanted, there would be no such thing as politics. Whatever the precise meaning of the complex activity known as politics might be, as this book illustrates. It has been understood by many different ways. It is clear that human experience never provides us with everything we want. Instead, we have to compete, struggle, compromise, and sometimes fight for things. In doing so, we develop a language to explain and to justify our claims, to try and challenge, contradict, to answer the claims of others. This might be the language of interest, whether of individuals or groups, or it might be the language of values such as rights and liberties, or fair shares and justice. But central to the activity of politics from its very beginning, it's the development of political ideas and concepts. This, these ideas help us to make out claims and defend our interests. So I find that this book is really interesting. And like I said, I've read a couple of the pages. I did a synopsis on what some of it means. And I think that it's let's talk about it. Let's read it. Leave me your comments in this video as I exit out because I have a lot to do. Anyhow, have a wonderful day and thank you for being here. I appreciate you.